Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be focusing on a structure that's pretty tiny, but pretty darn important too. We're talking about the cribriform plate.
Yeah, and for something so small, it can sure cause some big problems when things go wrong.
Exactly. So for those who need a quick refresher, this plate is basically this thin, delicate bone right up in the skull. And it's like this, it's kind of got this sieve-like structure separating the brain from the nasal cavity.
And it plays a pretty key role. I mean, think about CSF drainage, right?
Mm-hmm.
Plus, it can be a potential pathway for infections to make their way up to the brain, which is not what we want.
Right. Definitely not. So we're actually diving into a recent study about this. It was published in the Journal of Veterinary Diagnostic Investigation.
Yeah, and it really got me thinking about the importance of understanding this area. I mean, it's like a crossroads for both neurological and respiratory systems, right?
Absolutely. So this study specifically focused on neoplasms that affect the cribriform plate, both in dogs and cats.
And that's what makes it so valuable, right? It's the first of its kind to really zero in on this specific area.
I mean, think about it. Before this, vets were kind of left working with a much broader picture when it came to masses in, the sinonasal area and that rostral cranial fossa. Now they've got this more focused list of potential culprits, right?
Exactly. So they looked at autopsies from 32 dogs and 17 cats, spanning a pretty long period, 13 years to be exact.
Wow, so quite a bit of data to work with. What kind of trends did they find when they looked at all those cases?
Well, first off, with dogs, there wasn't any particular breed that seemed more prone to these neoplasms.
Okay, so no red flags there. What about cats? Anything stand out?
Interestingly, a good chunk of the cats were they were spayed females, and a lot of them were those typical domestic short hairs.
Huh. That's pretty interesting. Wonder what's going on there. Like, is there maybe some hormonal or genetic component we need to be looking at?
That's the million-dollar question. Now, shifting gears a bit, the study also looked at the clinical signs that were reported before these animals unfortunately passed. And in dogs, the most common things were seizures and nosebleeds. We call that epistaxis, but basically blood from the nose.
Okay, so we're already seeing that link, right? Problems in both the neurological and respiratory systems.
Yep. Now, cats were a bit different. It was more nasal discharge, often with this kind of reddish or brownish color, and of course seizures too.
So really, both species were experiencing issues that kind of pointed back to that cribriform plate, right?
It all comes down to location, 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 like you said. It's right in the middle of things.
Makes sense. And I'm guessing they found a variety of different tumor types affecting this area.
Yeah, for sure. But the most frequent ones in dogs were those sinonasal adenocarcinomas, and in cats, it was lymphomas.
Okay, so let's break those down a bit. Adenocarcinomas, those are the ones that start in glandular tissue, right? Like the cells that produce like mucus and other secretions.
Exactly. Think of them like little factories that have gone completely haywire. The cells just start multiplying out of control. And what's really interesting is that this kind of mirrors what we see in humans too.
Oh, wow. So not so different from our furry friends after all, at least when it comes to certain tumor types.
The parallels are definitely pretty striking. Now, I will say the study mentioned that their imaging data was a little limited, but when they did have it, it was definitely helpful for actually visualizing these masses.
Because seeing is believing, right? Even in veterinary medicine.
Oh, for sure. Tools like MRI and CT scans are absolutely critical. I mean, they help us really see the extent of the tumor, which is, that's key for deciding the best way to approach treatment.
Right, absolutely. So what about the autopsies themselves? What did they actually find when they were examining the tumors?
Well, they looked at both the gross appearance, which is basically what you see with the naked eye, and then they also did microscopic analysis. And there were some pretty interesting findings, even within the same tumor type. Like, they found 5 of the 13 adenocarcinomas in dogs. They had this more solid appearance, which is important to note for making an accurate diagnosis.
So even within a category, there can be variations that might change how you approach it.
Exactly. And then there was this whole discussion about the term transitional carcinoma.
Oh, yeah. I was curious about that.
So it's actually been kind of abandoned in human medicine because we now know it's not really its own thing. It's more like a subtype of squamous cell carcinoma. And it seems like the veterinary field might be heading in that same direction.
So really, our understanding of these tumors is constantly evolving, and the words we use to describe them matter a lot.
Couldn't agree more. Oh, and one more thing I just got to mention. They found a few cases where gliomas, brain tumors, were actually infiltrating the nasal cavity.
Wait, hold on. Brain tumors moving into the nose? That's wild.
Yeah, it's not something you see every day, and it really challenges our assumptions about how these tumors usually behave, right? The study even mentions some separate research specifically looking at gliomas with cribriform plate involvement. Clearly, there's still a lot we don't know about these tumors and how they spread.
That's incredible. So even with autopsies, there's still so many questions.
Absolutely. Plus, we got to remember this was a retrospective study.
Right. They were looking back at past cases.
Exactly. So the picture might be even more complicated in living animals.
You
right?
get makes sense. But hey, that's what makes science so exciting, right? We're always learning and trying to refine our understanding.
And that's what's so cool about research like this. It might seem super specific, but it can really have a ripple effect on the whole field.
So it's not just about identifying tumors in these specific cases. What does it actually change for vets out there treating our furry friends?
Well, I think it gives them a much better roadmap for these kind of cases, right? Knowing which tumors are more likely to involve the cribriform plate is huge.
Right. So they're not starting from scratch every time they see like a dog with seizures and a runny nose. They've got a list of like the usual suspects, which helps them get to a diagnosis faster.
Exactly. And a faster diagnosis means, it means we can start treatment sooner, which is especially important when we're dealing with cancer, right?
So potentially, this research could lead to better outcomes for pets. Now, that's something I can get behind.
For sure. And it paves the way for more research into how to best treat these specific types of tumors when they do involve the cribriform plate.
It's like they've given researchers a whole new set of tools to tackle this challenge.
Totally. What else stood out to you from this study?
Well, besides those sneaky gliomas, I was really struck by how much they emphasized, the need to consider both neurological and respiratory signs when you're suspecting a cribriform plate neoplasm.
It's like we were saying before, right? That location makes it like this super vulnerable spot where both systems can be affected.
Right. So if a dog or cat comes in with seizures, but they also have nasal discharge, that combo should be a major red flag.
Yeah. Got to connect the dots. And recognizing those patterns early on can make a huge difference. Now, speaking of patterns, let's talk about treatment for a sec. Did the study offer any insights on that front?
Yeah, because knowing the type of tumor is only half the battle, right?
Exactly. And while this study was mostly focused on identifying and classifying the tumors, it did highlight how tricky treatment can be, especially when it comes to surgery.
Oh, I bet. I mean, trying to remove a tumor from that area is such a delicate, hard-to-reach spot must be incredibly difficult.
It definitely is. And because these tumors can be so invasive, surgery might not even be an option sometimes.
So what are the alternatives?
Well, there's radiation therapy and chemotherapy, but those come with their own challenges,
Of course.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's no easy answer when it comes to treating tumors in such a sensitive area.
That's the unfortunate reality with a lot of cancers. But this research helps us see the problem more clearly, which hopefully will lead to better, less invasive treatments down the road.
So it's all about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. We've talked a lot about dogs, but we haven't really touched on the findings in cats.
Right. We got sidetracked by those crazy gliomas. What did they find on the feline side of things?
So in cats, the most common type was lymphoma, followed by adenocarcinoma. And remember those IHC tests they did on some of the lymphoma samples?
No, that was really interesting.
It's like they were doing a fingerprint analysis of the cells. They were able to actually pinpoint the specific subtype, which was B-cell lymphoma in these cases.
Yeah, so even though this was a study based on autopsies, they were still able to get some pretty incredible detail.
It's pretty amazing, right? And that level of detail is going to be so helpful for diagnosing and treating these tumors in living animals.
Okay, so just to recap here, we've got this groundbreaking study that's shining a light on these often overlooked cribriform plate neoplasms in both dogs and cats. We've got this new awareness of the types of tumors, the signs they cause, and the challenges we face when it comes to treatment.
That's a perfect summary. And it's important to remember that while this research is a huge step forward, we still have a lot to learn. This is really just the beginning.
So stay tuned, folks. This is just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to dive into some even bigger questions in the final part of our deep dive. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. Okay, so we're back, and I'm ready to kind of zoom out a bit. We've gone deep on the details of these cribriform plate neoplasms, what they look like, how we diagnose them, how tricky treatment can be. But I'm curious about the bigger picture, What are the big takeaways from all this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've touched on how this research can help vets right now in the clinic, but it really goes beyond that,
So it's not just about helping individual animals. It's about advancing our understanding of these really complex conditions.
Exactly. And I think it's a good reminder that, that we shouldn't underestimate those parts of the body that might seem kind of obscure, right?
Yeah, because as we've seen, even the tiniest structures can have a huge impact.
Totally. And sometimes studying those less common conditions, it can lead to some really unexpected discoveries that end up benefiting a much wider range of animals.
So what are some of the big questions that this research raises? Like, what are the mysteries we still need to solve?
Well, the big one is, how do we translate all this knowledge into better treatments? Treatments that are more effective and hopefully less invasive for animals dealing with these tumors.
That's the crux of the matter, isn't it? I imagine that's got to be a major focus for researchers moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. And with the groundwork laid by the study, I'm pretty optimistic that we'll see some really significant progress in the coming years.
It's exciting to think about. But for now, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. Any final thoughts for our listeners out there?
Just keep an eye on this area of research. The future of veterinary medicine is it's looking bright, and I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot more about cribriform plate neoplasms in the years to come.
And to all our fellow veterinary professionals and animal lovers out there, from Vet NeuroJar, keep those minds inspired, hearts light, and tails wagging.